The emergency meeting room fell silent as Commander HFY watched the holographic display show another dying world. Kepler-7 had been home to 12 billion souls just 3 days ago. Now it was nothing but a cold rock floating in space. "How many does that make?" asked General Vorthok, his blue, scaly skin turning darker with worry. 47 systems, HFY replied, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. 47 complete extinctions in less than 2 months. The Galactic Council had faced many threats over the centuries, wars between species, natural disasters, even rogue artificial intelligences. But nothing like this. Nothing that could wipe out entire civilizations without leaving a single survivor to tell what happened. The creatures had no official name at first. Different species called them different things. The Altarians called them Soul Eaters. The crystalline beings of Proxima referred to them as the Endless Hunger. But eventually one name stuck across all languages. Vexeri. Nobody knew where they came from. The first attacks happened on the Outer Rim, in systems so remote that by the time anyone noticed, there was nothing left to investigate. Ships sent to study the dead worlds never returned. Long-range sensors showed nothing but empty planets, stripped of all life. Dr. Sojin had been studying the pattern for weeks now. Her small research station orbited a gas giant far from any inhabited. Worlds making it the perfect place to analyze data without panic spreading through the population. She was one of the few xenobiologists in the galaxy who specialized in predator species, and what she found in the data terrified her. "They're not random attacks," she told her research team during their morning briefing. "Look at the progression." A holographic map showed the galaxy with red dots marking each destroyed system. At first glance, it looked random. But when Dr. Sojin adjusted the display to show neural complexity ratings of the extinct species, a clear pattern emerged. "They're hunting the smartest species first," whispered her assistant, Dr. Minho. Exactly. The Altarians had an average IQ equivalent of 180. The Proxima crystals could process quantum calculations in their heads. Every species they've targeted had advanced cognitive abilities. This was worse than anyone had imagined. It meant the Vexteri weren't just mindless destroyers, they were selective. They were intelligent. And they were working their way through the galaxy's most advanced civilizations. Meanwhile, on the Council, Station HFY was dealing with panic among the member species. Reports came in daily of entire fleets abandoning their posts, civilian populations fleeing to the galaxy's outer edges, and governments collapsing under the weight of mass hysteria. "We need to see one," announced Admiral Doxu during an emergency session. "We need to capture a live specimen." The other council members looked at him like he had suggested flying directly into a black hole. "Every ship that gets close enough to study them disappears," argued Representative Zendak, her tentacles writhing with agitation. "We have no visual records, no energy signatures, nothing." "Then we're fighting blind," Doxu replied firmly. "And that's exactly why we keep losing." The first breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A heavily damaged cargo ship limped into council space with its crew barely alive. Captain Taeyong had been making a supply run to a mining colony when the attack began. "It started with the miners acting strange," he told the debriefing team, his hands shaking as he spoke. "They stopped responding to communications. Then they started attacking each other. The Vexeri were controlling them," asked HFY. "No, not controlling. Replacing." Taeyong's voice dropped to a whisper. "The things we fought looked exactly like the miners. Same faces, same voices, same memories. But their eyes were wrong, and they were stronger, much stronger. This was the first solid intelligence anyone had gathered about the enemy. The Vexeri were shapeshifters. They could take the form of any living being, perfectly copying their appearance, and apparently their knowledge as well." Dr. Sojin received this information and immediately understood the full horror of what they were facing. A species that could become anyone, learn anything, and adapt to any situation. It explained how they had defeated every defense so icily. They simply became whatever they needed to be to win. The next attack confirmed their worst fears. The fortress world of Titan Prime was considered impregnable. It had defended the sector for 300 years. With weapons that could destroy entire fleets and shields that had never been penetrated, the attack lasted 6 hours. When relief forces arrived, they found the fortress guns turned inward, firing on the city they were meant to protect. The garrison had killed each other in a massive battle that left no survivors. Security footage showed the defenders fighting creatures that looked exactly like other defenders. They learn, Dr. Sojin explained to the emergency council session, not just tactics or technology. They learn to be us. Every encounter makes them stronger because they absorb everything about their victims. The implications were staggering. Every battle lost didn't just cost lives and resources. It gave the enemy new knowledge, new forms to copy, new ways to infiltrate and destroy. Fear spread through the galaxy faster than the Vexari themselves. Trade stopped. Communications networks went silent as species isolated themselves, afraid that any contact might bring the shapeshifters to their worlds. On her research station, Dr. Sojin made one final, terrifying discovery. She had been analyzing the progression of attacks, trying to predict where the Vexari would strike next. The pattern was becoming clear. They were moving toward the galactic core, toward the most populated, most advanced systems, and based on their current speed and the neural complexity ratings of their targets, she could predict exactly which species would be next. The Zephyrians, with their quantum minds, would be attacked within days. Then the collective consciousness of the Hive Mothers. After that, the synthetic beings of the Machine Federation. But there was something else in the data. A species so new to galactic civilization that they barely registered on the threat assessment charts. A species whose neural patterns were still being studied because they had only achieved faster-than-light travel 50 years ago. Humans, Dr. Sojin stared at the data for a long time. According to her calculations, humanity wouldn't be targeted for months, maybe even years. They were too primitive, too unimportant for the Vexari to notice. But as she watched the red dots creep closer to the core worlds, she realized something that chilled her to the bone. By the time the Vexari got around to hunting humans, there might not be anyone left in the galaxy to warn them. The council meeting that followed was the most desperate in galactic history. Every known species was contacted, even the ones that had withdrawn from galactic society centuries ago. The message was simple: unite or face extinction alone. Most species responded with fear, offering to hide in the furthest reaches of space until the threat passed. Others suggested destroying entire sectors to create barriers the Vexari couldn't cross. But one response surprised everyone. It came from a small blue planet on the edge of human space. The message was short and simple: we'll help. When do we start? Nobody expected much from the humans. They were newcomers, barely past their nuclear age, with technology centuries behind the major powers. But protocol demanded that all species be given a chance to contribute to the defense effort. As Haywin prepared to brief the human delegation, she couldn't help but feel sorry for them. They had no idea what they were volunteering for. They thought they were joining a war. They had no idea they were about to face the perfect predator. Captain Tejo was drinking his morning coffee when the strangest message of his career appeared on his ship's communication screen. The signal came from deep space, carrying the official seal of something called the Galactic Council. "Sir, you need to see this," called out his communications officer, Lieutenant Jiwoo. Her voice carried a mix of confusion and excitement that made Tejo set down his cup and walk over to her station. The message was long and detailed, speaking of ancient alliances, galactic threats, and humanity's duty to join a war effort. Tejo read it 3 times before he started laughing. "Someone's playing a very elaborate joke," he said, shaking his head. "Galactic Council? Alien species? Come on." But then his sensors detected something that made him stop laughing. Massive energy signatures were moving through space toward human territory. The readings were unlike anything in Earth's databases. The energy patterns suggested weapons capable of destroying entire planets. "Get me a direct line to Earth Command," Tejo ordered. "Priority 1. 3 hours later, a small human fleet was heading toward the coordinates provided in the message. Tahoe commanded the lead ship, still half convinced this was some kind of elaborate first contact scenario that had gone wrong. The council station was bigger than anything humans had ever built. It stretched 4 kilometers in every direction, with docking bays that could hold ships the size of cities. As Tahoe's modest cruiser approached, he felt like a rowboat pulling up to an aircraft carrier. Commander Hay-1 met the human delegation. At the main airlock, she tried to hide her disappointment when she saw them. The humans were small, soft-looking creatures wearing simple uniforms. Their technology seemed primitive compared to the advanced civilizations she was used to working with. "Welcome to Council Station," she said politely. "I am Commander Hay-1. Thank you for responding to our call for aid." Captain Tahoe stepped forward and gave a small bow, which surprised her. Most species had elaborate greeting rituals, but this simple gesture seemed genuine.
"Captain Tahoe
"Of the Earth Defense Force," he replied. "We're here to help however we can." Hay-1 led the human group through the station's corridors. They passed representatives from dozens of different species, tall, elegant beings with crystalline skin, massive creatures that looked like walking trees, and small floating entities that communicated through color changes. The humans stared at everything with obvious wonder, but they didn't seem afraid. Hay-1 had seen many species react to their first exposure to galactic civilization with panic or religious awe. The humans just looked curious. "How many species are part of this council?" asked Dr. Yunsu, the human team scientist. 237, Hay-1 answered, though that number is dropping every day. She led them to a massive briefing room where holographic displays showed the current state of the galaxy. Red zones marked systems that had fallen to the Vexari. The red was spreading like a disease across the star maps. Dr. Sojin was already waiting in the briefing room, along with military leaders from a dozen different worlds. She looked up as the humans entered and felt a moment of sympathy. These primitive beings had no idea what they were volunteering for. "These are the humans," Hay-1 announced to the assembled group. "They've agreed to join our defensive efforts." A few of the alien commanders exchanged glances. General Vorthok leaned over to his aide and whispered something that made them both chuckle. The humans were clearly out of their league here. Dr. Sojin began her presentation with the latest intelligence on the Vexari. She showed footage from the few surviving security cameras, displaying shape-shifting creatures that moved with impossible speed and strength. "They learn and adapt faster than any species we've encountered," she explained. "Every tactic we use against them becomes useless within hours. They copy our strategies, our technology, even our biology." The alien commanders nodded grimly. They'd all lost ships, soldiers, and entire worlds to these creatures. The briefing continued with tactical assessments, weapon specifications, and casualty reports that painted a picture of hopeless defeat. But Lieutenant Nari, the human military strategist, was taking notes and asking questions that puzzled the other commanders. "How long do they typically study a defensive position before attacking?" she asked. "Usually 12 to 18 hours, replied Admiral Doxu. "Why does that matter?" "They always adapt their strategy based on what they observe." "Always. It's what makes them so dangerous." Nari exchanged a look with Captain Tahoe. What if they observed something that wasn't actually the real strategy? The room fell silent. Dr. Sojin looked confused. "I don't understand what you mean." "Deception," Tahoe explained. "Showing them fake defenses while hiding your real strategy. Making them adapt to something that isn't there." General Vorthok snorted with derision. "Impossible. The Vexari are too intelligent to fall for simple tricks. They analyze everything perfectly." "That's exactly the problem," Nari continued. "They're too smart. They always look for the most logical, efficient strategy." "What if you gave them something completely illogical to analyze?" The alien commanders looked at each other with confusion. Their culture's military efficiency was everything. The idea of deliberately using bad tactics was incomprehensible. Dr. Yunsu spoke up. "On Earth we have a saying, all warfare is based on deception. Sometimes the best strategy is to make your enemy think you're weaker than you are. Or stronger," added Tahoe, "or completely insane." Dr. Sojin found herself intrigued despite her skepticism. You're suggesting we deliberately use inferior tactics? You're suggesting we use unpredictable tactics? Nari corrected. If these creatures learn by observing patterns, what happens when there's no pattern to observe? The briefing continued for several more hours, with the humans asking questions that no other species had thought to ask. Instead of focusing on how to build better defenses, they wanted to know about Vexari psychology, their decision-making processes, and their reaction times. Admiral Doksu finally grew impatient. "We speak of theory, but we need practical solutions. What can your species actually contribute to this war effort?" Captain Tejo was quiet for a moment. "We can contribute soldiers who don't think like you do." "Is that supposed to be helpful?" "Maybe. You've all been fighting this enemy the same way, with logic, efficiency, and superior technology. And you've all lost." Tejo gestured to the red zones on the star map. "Perhaps it's time to try something different." Heiwan found herself considering the human perspective, despite her doubts. Every conventional approach had failed. Every logical strategy had been countered. Maybe these primitive beings had a point? "What are you proposing?" she asked. "Let us study your tactical data," Nari said. "Give us access to everything you know about Vexari behavior. Then let us try our methods." "Your methods." Tejo smiled grimly. "Human methods might not be the strongest or smartest species in the galaxy, but we've gotten very good at surviving things that should have killed us." The meeting ended with a reluctant agreement. The humans would be given access to all available intelligence on the Vexari. They would be allowed to participate in the next defensive operation, but nobody expected much from them, as the alien commanders filed out of the briefing room. Many of them were already discussing how to minimize the damage the humans might cause to their own forces. These primitive beings clearly didn't understand what they were facing, but Dr. Sojin lingered behind, watching the humans as they studied the tactical displays with intense concentration. There was something about their approach that intrigued her. While every other species looked at the Vexari and saw an unstoppable force, the humans seemed to see a puzzle to be solved. "You really think you can find a weakness in creatures that have defeated every military force in the galaxy?" she asked. Lieutenant Nari looked up from the holographic battle reports she was analyzing. "Every predator has weaknesses, even the perfect ones." "What makes you think you can find it when no one else has?" Nari smiled. "Because everyone else has been looking for logical weaknesses. We're going to look for illogical ones." As the humans continued their research, Dr. Sojin found herself feeling something she hadn't experienced in months. Hope. It might be foolish. Hope, based on nothing more than alien optimism, but it was hope nonetheless. Outside the station, the Vexari continued their advance toward the galactic core. 3 more systems had fallen while the briefing took place. Time was running out for every civilization in the galaxy, but for the first time since the war began, someone was planning to fight back in a way the enemy had never seen before. The mining world of Titan 7 looked peaceful from orbit. Green forests covered most of the planet's surface, broken only by the geometric patterns of mining operations and the small cities that housed the workers. It was home to 3 million beings from 12 different species, all working together to extract rare metals from the planet's core. Dr. Myung watched the planet through her ship's view screen and tried not to think about what was coming. The long-range sensors had detected the Vexari fleet 2 days ago. They would arrive within hours. "All civilian transports have cleared the system," reported Captain Subin from the command center. "Military forces are in position." The defense fleet was impressive by any standard. 47 warships from 8 different species, armed with the most advanced weapons the galaxy could produce. Energy cannons that could slice through asteroids, shield generators that had never been penetrated, and tactical computers that could calculate 1,000,000 battle scenarios per second. Sergeant Byung-ho stood in the transport bay of his ship, checking his equipment one final time. His squad consisted of 12 human soldiers, all volunteers who had trained for exactly this kind of mission. They looked small and fragile compared to the massive alien warriors in the neighboring bays. "Remember the plan?" he told his team. "We don't try to win. We don't try to be heroes. We just do things that don't make sense." Private Dongmin raised his hand. Sergeant, I still don't understand how acting crazy is supposed to help. Because the enemy expects us to act smart, Bung-ho replied. They've studied every military force in the galaxy. They know how soldiers think, how they fight, how they react to different situations. But they've never studied humans before. The first sign of the Vexari arrival was the disappearance of the outer sensor stations. One by one, the monitoring posts went silent without sending any distress signals. The enemy was being careful, studying the defenses before making their move. Commander Haewon watched from the flagship as her tactical displays updated with the latest intelligence. Everything was proceeding exactly as expected. The Vexari would observe for several hours, analyze the defensive positions, and then attack with a perfectly coordinated strategy. All units maintain defensive positions, she ordered, for them to make the first move. But down on the planet's surface, the human forces were already moving. Sergeant Byung-ho led his squad away from their assigned defensive position and toward the main mining complex. They weren't abandoning their post. They were following a completely different plan. Target the conveyor system first, Byung-ho instructed. Make it look like we're trying to protect the mining equipment. The squad spread out through the complex, setting up defensive positions around machinery that had no strategic value whatsoever. To any observer, it would look like the humans had completely misunderstood their mission. Dr. Myung was embedded with the human unit, tasked with observing their tactics and recording the enemy's response. She watched in confusion as the soldiers began doing things that made no military sense. Private Jae-sung was painting bright orange targets on the sides of buildings. When she asked him why, he shrugged and said, "The lieutenant told me to make us easier to spot." Corporal Hyojin was digging holes in seemingly random locations and filling them with small explosive charges. Not enough to cause significant damage, but enough to make loud noises and bright flashes. "What's the purpose of those?" Dr. Myung asked. "Fireworks," Hyojin replied cheerfully. "We figured the aliens might like a show." The Vexari attack began at dawn, just as the tactical computers had predicted. Massive shapes descended from the sky, shifting and changing as they fell. Some looked like enormous insects. Others resembled giant squids. A few took forms that hurt to look at directly. The main defensive line held for exactly 14 minutes. The alien warships in orbit unleashed devastating firepower, but the Vexatheri had already adapted. Their shields absorbed the energy weapons, their armor deflected the kinetic rounds, and their speed made targeting systems useless. Then something unexpected happened. The creatures approaching the mining complex suddenly stopped. They had been advancing in perfect formation, adapting to each defensive position as they encountered it. But when they reached the area where the humans were stationed, they hesitated. The tactical displays showed Vexari forces gathered around the mining complex. But they weren't attacking. They seemed to be studying. "What are they waiting for?" asked Admiral Doksu from his command ship. Dr. Myung was asking herself the same question. The creatures were clearly observing the human positions, trying to understand the defensive strategy. But there was no strategy to understand. Private Dongman was sitting on top of a mining drill, eating his lunch and waving at the nearest Vexari. The creature had taken the form of a large wolf-like predator, but it was just standing there, tilting its head in apparent confusion. Sergeant Byung-ho activated his radio. "All units begin Phase 2. Phase 2 was even stranger than Phase 1. The human soldiers abandoned their defensive positions and began wandering around the mining complex like tourists. Some of them started collecting interesting rocks. Others began playing cards in the middle of what should have been a battlefield. Corporal Hyojin activated his fireworks, sending colorful explosions into the air for no apparent reason. The noise attracted several Vexari, who approached cautiously, and then stopped again, clearly trying to figure out the tactical purpose of the display. "They're not adapting," Dr. Myung whispered into her recorder. "The Vexari forces have been observing the human positions for over an hour, but they haven't attacked?" This was unprecedented. Every previous encounter with the Vexari had followed the same pattern: observation, analysis, adaptation, and then overwhelming assault. But these creatures seemed stuck in the analysis phase. Private Jae-sung decided to try something even more confusing. He walked directly toward a group of Vextheri, sat down about 10 meters away from them, began sketching their portraits in a small notebook. The creatures stared at him. He stared back, occasionally making notes about their appearance. After several minutes, one of the Vextheri shapeshifted into an exact copy of Jae-sung and sat down facing him. "Huh," said the real Jae-sung. "Want to see my drawing?" He held up the notebook, showing a crude sketch of the creature's previous wolf-like form. The Vextheri copy tilted its head, clearly confused by this interaction. Meanwhile, the main battle was going badly for the Allied forces. The Vextheri had adapted to every conventional tactic within hours. Ships that had seemed invincible were being torn apart by creatures that had learned to counter their weapon systems, but in the mining complex, something very different was happening. The human squad had been playing hide-and-seek with their assigned Vextheri forces for 3 hours. Every time the creatures thought they understood what the humans were trying to accomplish, the soldiers would do something completely different. Dr. Mi-young was documenting behavior that no xenobiologist had ever recorded. The Vextheri were clearly becoming frustrated. Their shape-shifting was becoming less precise, their movements less coordinated. Some of them had started making what could only be described as angry noises. "Sergeant," she called to Byung-ho, "I think you're actually confusing them." "Good," he replied. "That's the point." The breakthrough came when Private Dongmin tried to teach a Vextheri how to play rock, paper, scissors. The creature had copied his human form perfectly, but it couldn't understand the concept of a game with no winning strategy. Every time Dongmin threw rock, the creature would throw paper. When Dongmin switched to scissors, the creature would throw rock. It was trying to create a pattern it could learn and exploit. But rock, paper, scissors has no pattern. After 20 minutes of this, the Vextheri suddenly stopped moving entirely. Its perfect human disguise began to flicker and change, cycling through different forms rapidly. Then it collapsed. "Did it just have a breakdown?" Dr. Mi-young asked in amazement. "Looks like it," Dongmin replied. "Should I try to wake it up?" News of what happened at the mining complex spread through the Allied fleet within hours. For the first time since the war began, someone had found a way to neutralize Vextheri forces without destroying them. Commander Hae-won studied the reports with growing excitement. The humans hadn't defeated the enemy through superior firepower or advanced tactics. They had simply confused them into shutting down. "How many Vextheri did your unit neutralize?" she asked Sergeant Byung-ho during the debrief. 17, he reported. "Though we didn't really defeat them, we just made them too confused to function properly." "And your casualties?" "None. They were too busy trying to figure out what we were doing to actually attack us." Dr. Mi-young added her observations to the official report. The Vextheri mind appears to be optimized for pattern recognition and logical analysis. When confronted with truly random behavior, their cognitive processes begin to overload. The defense of Titan 7 was ultimately lost. The planet fell to the Vextheri after a 6-hour battle. But for the first time, the Allied forces had learned something valuable about their enemy. The perfect predator had a weakness. They could be confused. They could be overwhelmed. Most importantly, they could be stopped by something they had never encountered before. Purposeful irrationality. As the surviving ships retreated from Titan 7, the human squad was already planning their next mission. They had discovered something that no other species in the galaxy possessed: the ability to act completely crazy and call it a strategy. "So what do we do next?" asked Private. Dongmin Sergeant Byung-ho smiled grimly. "We get better at being unpredictable." The news from Titan 7 spread through the galaxy faster than any military communication in history. For the first time since the war began, someone had found a way to stop the Vextheri without losing entire fleets in the process. Colonel Woo Jin sat in his office aboard the human command ship, studying battle reports that read like comedy scripts instead of military documents. His soldiers had defeated enemy forces by playing children's games, having picnics during combat, and teaching aliens how to dance. "Sir, the Galactic Council wants to see our tactical manual," reported his aide, Lieutenant Young-soo. "We don't have a tactical manual," Woo Jin replied. That's the whole point. The colonel had been working on something he called the Chaos Protocol. It wasn't really a military strategy in any traditional sense. It was more like a guide to being as unpredictable as possible while still accomplishing basic mission objectives. Rule 1. Never use the same tactic twice. Rule 2. If something starts working, stop doing it immediately. Rule 3. When in doubt, do something that makes no sense. Dr. Sojin arrived at the human ship 3 days later, eager to study this new approach to warfare. She had spent her entire career analyzing predator behavior, and the Vexeri were the ultimate predators. But somehow, these primitive humans had found their weakness. I want to understand how you train soldiers to act irrationally, she told Colonel Wujin during their first meeting. We don't train them to act irrationally, he explained. We train them to stop acting rationally. There's a difference. Dr. Sojin didn't understand the distinction, but she was willing to learn. She embedded herself with a human training unit to observe their methods firsthand. What she saw challenged everything she thought. She knew about military science. Sergeant Kung Su was running a training exercise that looked more like a theater class than combat preparation. His soldiers were practicing emotional reactions to different situations: fear, anger, joy, confusion, and learning to switch between them randomly during combat scenarios. The enemy expects soldiers to be disciplined and controlled, Kung Su explained to his trainees. So we're going to be undisciplined and out of control, but in a controlled way. Private Hejin raised her hand. Sergeant, how do we be out of control in a controlled way? Good question. Who can answer that? Corporal Minsu volunteered. We act crazy, but we remember our mission objectives. Exactly. We can run around screaming and throwing rocks at the enemy, as long as we're running toward our target and the rocks hit something important. Dr. Sojin watched this training with growing fascination. Humans were deliberately teaching their soldiers to abandon military discipline while maintaining unit cohesion. It should have been impossible. The next test came sooner than anyone expected. The fortress world of Zarian Prime sent out a distress call. Long-range sensors detected a massive Vexeri fleet heading directly toward the planet. This would be the largest enemy force encountered since the war began. Major Kunsu volunteered his unit for the defense mission. His soldiers had been training with the Chaos Protocol for only 2 weeks, but they were eager to test their new methods against a real enemy. Commander Haewon was reluctant to approve the deployment. Your unit has never faced more than a few dozen Vexeri at once. This fleet contains thousands of them. That's perfect, replied Major Kung Su. More enemies means more opportunities to confuse them. The defense of Zarian Prime began like every other battle in the war. The Vexeri fleet arrived in perfect formation, deployed scanning drones to study the defensive positions, and began their systematic analysis of enemy capabilities. But something was different this time. The human forces weren't waiting in defensive positions. They were already moving around the planet's surface in patterns that made no tactical sense. Captain Subin led a raid on an abandoned shopping mall. Not because it had any strategic value, but because Major Kang Su thought it would be interesting to see what happens. Her squad spent 3 hours rearranging store displays and setting up elaborate obstacle courses using shopping carts. The Vexeri forces that followed them into the mall found themselves navigating a maze of mannequins, promotional banners, and motivational posters that said things like, "Today's a great day to confuse aliens and please keep your tentacles off the merchandise." Meanwhile, Corporal Jaezoon was conducting what he called psychological warfare operations in the planet's main city. His team was spreading rumors that humans could see through Vexeri, shape-shifting abilities by looking at their shadows. This wasn't true, but the Vexeri didn't know that. In hours, the creatures were wasting enormous amounts of energy, creating increasingly complex shadow effects to match their disguises. Some of them were generating shadows that moved independently of their bodies, creating optical illusions that confused their own forces more than the humans. Dr. Myung was documenting everything from an observation, a post on the planet's largest mountain. What she recorded would revolutionize the field of xenopsychology. Day 3 of the siege, she spoke into her recorder. The Vexeri forces are showing clear signs of cognitive strain. Individual creatures are making basic, tactical errors. Some have been observed arguing with each other, which has never been documented before. The breakthrough came when specialist Hyojin tried something that even the other humans thought was completely insane. She decided to start a conversation. With a captured Vex theory through interpretive dance, the creature had taken the form of a human soldier, perfectly copying the appearance and mannerisms it had observed. But when Hyojin began dancing, a series of random movements that expressed emotions like confused happiness and aggressive friendship, the Vex theory's cognitive processes crashed completely. Its shape-shifting abilities malfunctioned, cycling rapidly through dozens of different forms. Its speech became garbled. Finally, it simply stopped moving entirely and began making a high-pitched whining sound. "I think I broke it," Hyojin reported cheerfully. Dr. Myung rushed to examine the creature. What she found amazed her. The Vex theory's neural patterns showed signs of complete cognitive overload. Its brain, or whatever served as its central processing unit, had essentially given up trying to understand what it was experiencing. "This is extraordinary," she told Major Kyunsu. "Gosh, you've discovered a way to weaponize meaninglessness." Word of Hyojin's success spread through the human forces within hours. Soon, soldiers across the planet were engaging in deliberately nonsensical activities whenever they encountered Vexary forces. Private Dongwu started a cooking competition in the middle of a firefight, using alien vegetation to make soup. While explaining his recipe to bewildered enemy forces, the Vexary spent so much time trying to understand the tactical significance of his cooking that they forgot to attack his position. Sergeant Borum organized a poetry reading in an abandoned warehouse, where human soldiers recited original works about topics like the loneliness of being a rock and why my left shoe is sad. The Vexary forces surrounding the warehouse became so focused on analyzing the meaning behind the poetry that they failed to notice human reinforcements moving into position around them. The most effective tactic was discovered by accident. When Corporal Jahoon's radio malfunctioned during a battle, instead of calling for backup, he started singing folk songs from his childhood. The Vexary forces attacking his position stopped mid-charge, apparently trying to determine whether the singing was some kind of sonic weapon. By the end of the first week, the siege of Zarian Prime had become the strangest military operation in galactic history. The Vexary had deployed enough firepower to destroy a dozen planets, but they couldn't figure out how to use it effectively against an enemy that refused to behave logically. Dr. Sojin observed the situation from orbit. Recorded case of an entire Vexary fleet becoming paralyzed by confusion. The creatures were still dangerous individually, but their coordination had broken down completely. "They're designed to be perfect predators," she explained to Commander Haewon. "But perfection requires predictability. The humans have introduced chaos into a system that can't handle it." The other alien species finally began to understand what made humans dangerous. It wasn't their technology, their physical abilities, or their intelligence. It was their willingness to abandon logic when survival was at stake. For millions of years, evolution had rewarded rational behavior and punished irrationality. But humans had developed the unique ability to choose irrationality as a survival strategy. In a universe that operated on logical principles, this made them the most unpredictable force imaginable. As the siege continued, more alien commanders began requesting human advisors for their own forces. They wanted to learn how to think like humans, how to embrace chaos as a weapon. But as Colonel Woojin warned them, you can't learn to be irrational. You either are or you aren't. And most species aren't. The defense of Zarian Prime was far from over, but for the first time since the war began, the Vexary were the ones who seemed afraid. The siege of Zarian Prime had been going on for 3 weeks, and the galaxy was watching in amazement. For the first time in the war, a Vexary fleet was stuck. They had enough firepower to glass the entire planet, but they couldn't use it. Effectively because they couldn't understand their enemy, Captain Subin led another pointless raid on day 22. This time targeting a children's playground in an abandoned city. Her mission was to accomplish absolutely nothing while making it look extremely important. "Remember, team," she told her squad as they approached the playground, We need to defend this swing set, like our lives depend on it. Why are we defending? A swing set, Captain, asked Private Yanwu. Because it confuses them, Subin replied. And confused enemies are easier to handle than smart ones. The Vexari forces that followed them were clearly struggling. Dr. Myung watched through her observation equipment as the creatures spent hours analyzing the tactical significance of playground equipment. Some of them had started copying the humans by sitting on swings, apparently trying to understand the strategic advantage of this behavior. But the real breakthrough was happening in Dr. Myung's research lab. She had been studying captured Vexari for weeks now, documenting something that no scientist had ever seen before: the systematic breakdown of a perfect intelligence. Subject 17 has been inactive for 6 days, she recorded in her daily log. Its shape-shifting abilities have completely failed. When presented with simple logical puzzles, it either gives random answers or refuses to respond at all. The Vexari in the containment cell looked nothing like the terrifying predator it had been when first captured. Its form kept shifting between different shapes, sometimes human, sometimes alien, sometimes just a confused blob of organic matter that couldn't decide what it wanted to be. Dr. Yunsu, the human psychologist, was working with Dr. Myung to understand what was happening to the creatures. It's like they're having nervous breakdowns, he explained. Their minds are designed to process information perfectly, but when they encounter information that makes no sense, they can't handle it. The humans had discovered something remarkable about the Vexari. The creatures weren't just intelligent, they were dependent on intelligence. Take away their ability to understand and analyze, and they became helpless. Meanwhile, Corporal Jasun had perfected his rumor-spreading operations. The stories he was planting among the Vexari forces were becoming more elaborate each day. Today's rumor claimed that humans could become invisible by thinking happy thoughts. It wasn't true, but the Vexari didn't know that. Soon creatures across the planet were wasting energy trying to detect invisible humans who weren't actually invisible. Stop trusting their own senses, reported Sergeant Nara from her observation post. I watched a Vexari spend 2 hours hunting for an invisible human who was standing right next to it the whole time. The psychological warfare was working better than anyone had expected. The Vexari were so busy trying to understand human deception that they were deceiving themselves. But the most effective human weapon turned out to be something nobody had planned for. Specialist Hyojin had started what she called aggressive friendship, treating the Vexari like confused pets who needed help and encouragement. Come on, you can do better than that, she would tell attacking creatures while dodging their strikes. I believe in you. Try shape-shifting into something prettier. This approach was devastatingly effective because the Vexari had no defense against genuine kindness. They were designed to counter aggression, fear, and tactical thinking. But encouragement and emotional support short-circuited their combat programming completely. Dr. Myung documented several cases of Vexari forces simply sitting down and refusing to fight after extended exposure to human encouragement. The creatures seemed to be having identity crises. The breakthrough that would end the siege came from an unexpected source. Private Dongmin was trying to teach a Vexari how to play a simple word game when the creature suddenly stopped functioning entirely. What happened? Asked Dr. Yunso, who had been observing the interaction. I asked it to think of a word that rhymes with orange, Dongmin explained. It's been frozen like that for 20 minutes. Dr. Myung examined the creature and made an astonishing discovery. The Vexari had been trying to solve the word puzzle, but since no common words rhyme with orange, its mind had gotten trapped in an endless loop of searching for an answer that didn't exist. Like a computer virus, she explained excitedly. We can crash their minds by giving them impossible problems to solve. This discovery led to the development of what the humans called cognitive warfare. They began deliberately presenting the Vexari with paradoxes, impossible questions, logical contradictions that would overload their mental processes. Sergeant Biorum specialized in philosophical warfare. She would approach Vexari forces and ask them questions like, can an all-powerful being create a rock so heavy that even they can't lift it? Or if everything I say is a lie, am I telling the truth right now? The results were immediate and dramatic. Vexari exposed to these paradoxes would freeze up, malfunction, or simply collapse as their minds tried unsuccessfully to process the contradictions. But the humans weren't satisfied with just defensive victories. They wanted to understand how far they could push this advantage. Lieutenant Asu organized what he called art therapy sessions for captured Vexeri. The goal was to see if exposure to meaningless creativity could permanently damage their cognitive abilities. "Today we're going to paint our feelings," he announced to a group of confused creatures. "Remember, there are no wrong answers in art." The Vexeri tried desperately to find the tactical purpose behind finger painting and abstract sculpture. When they couldn't, several of them had complete mental breakdowns. Dr. Yunsu was documenting the psychological impact of human tactics on enemy forces. "They're experiencing something like clinical depression," he reported.
Ow.
"These creatures have never encountered failure before. They don't know how to cope with being unable to understand their environment." The most devastating attack came when the humans introduced the concept of humor to the Vexeri. Corporal Minsu had been telling jokes to enemy forces as a form of psychological warfare, but nobody expected the results that followed. "Why did the chicken cross the road?" he asked a group of shapeshifters who had been trying to infiltrate a human position. "To reach the other side," one of them answered after analyzing thousands of possible strategic implications. "Exactly," Minsu replied cheerfully. "Isn't that funny?" The Vexeri stared at him in complete confusion. They had found the correct answer, but they couldn't understand why it was supposed to be amusing. The concept of humor, finding entertainment in pointlessness, was completely alien to their logical minds. Several creatures began showing signs of what could only be called existential crisis. If the purpose of the joke was simply to be pointless, what was the purpose of anything? Their entire worldview began to crumble. By the end of the 4th week, Vexeri fleet orbiting Zarian Prime was in complete disarray. Individual ships were flying in circles, apparently unable to decide on a course of action. Others had simply stopped moving entirely. The creatures that had once been the galaxy's most feared predators were now afraid to engage human forces. They had learned that every encounter with humans resulted in more confusion, more contradictions, and more damage to their mental stability. Commander Haywan watched the tactical displays with amazement. "They're retreating?" she announced to the fleet. "The Vexeri are actually retreating." This was the first voluntary Vexeri withdrawal in the history of the war. The creatures that had never known defeat were now afraid of something they couldn't understand or counter. Dr. Mi-young prepared her final report on the siege. "The humans have discovered something extraordinary," she wrote. "They've learned to weaponize chaos itself. In doing so, they've turned the galaxy's greatest strength, intelligence, into its greatest weakness." The siege of Zarian Prime was over, but the real war was just beginning. The humans had proven that the Vexeri could be defeated. Now they had to figure out how to save the rest of the galaxy from the perfect predators, who were no longer quite so perfect. The Vexeri homeworld was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. It was a planet-sized brain, covered in neural networks that pulsed with the collective intelligence of billions of creatures. Every Vexeri in the galaxy was connected to this central consciousness, sharing knowledge and coordinating their actions across thousands of star systems. Admiral Changmin stood on the bridge of the human flagship, looking at the massive world through the view screen. Around him, the largest fleet in galactic history was preparing for the final battle. Ships from every surviving species had gathered for this last desperate assault. "All units report ready," announced Captain Tejo from the communications station. "The alien fleets are in position." But Changmin was more interested in the smaller ships scattered throughout the formation. These were the human vessels. Carrying the soldiers who had learned to fight with chaos instead of order, Dr. Sojin was aboard the flagship as an observer, documenting what would either be the greatest victory or the final defeat in galactic history. She had spent months studying human tactics, and she still couldn't fully understand how they worked. "Admiral, are you certain this plan will succeed?" she asked Changmin. "No," he replied honestly, "but that's what makes it perfect. If we're not sure it will work, then the Vexeri definitely won't see it coming." The human plan was the most ridiculous military strategy ever conceived. Instead of trying to destroy the Vexeri homeworld, We're going to confuse it to death. Every human ship in the fleet was equipped with what Dr. Yunsu called cognitive bombs, broadcasting devices that would transmit pure randomness directly into the planet's neural network. Combined with the ongoing chaos tactics, this would create a feedback loop that could crash the entire Vex-3 collective consciousness. The battle began exactly as expected. The Vexari defense fleet was massive and perfectly coordinated. Every ship moved in harmony with every other ship, creating defensive patterns that were mathematically flawless. The alien fleets engaged them with conventional tactics, drawing their attention while the human forces prepared for their real mission. "Begin Operation Nonsense," ordered Admiral Chang Dashman. The human ships scattered across the battlefield, but not in any recognizable formation. Some flew upside down. Others moved in spirals that served no tactical purpose. A few began broadcasting Earth music at maximum volume. Captain Subin commanded one of the assault ships, leading her crew in what she had started calling interpretive space combat. Her ship performed barrel rolls and loop-de-loops while firing weapons at empty space. "Captain, why are we shooting at nothing?" asked her gunner, Ensign Eugen. "Because the Vexari expects us to shoot at them," Subin explained. "So we're shooting at everything except them." The Vexari defense fleet began showing signs of confusion within minutes. Their perfect formations started to wobble as individual ships tried to understand the tactical purpose behind human actions that had no tactical purpose. Meanwhile, Dr. Myung was leading the ground assault on the planet's surface. Her mission was to reach the central neural hub and plant the cognitive bombs directly into the planet's brain. The surface of the world was covered in massive thinking structures that pulsed with electrical activity. The air itself seemed alive, with the mental energy of billions of connected minds. "Remember the plan," Dr. Myung told her team as they landed. "We're not trying to fight our way to the target. We're trying to confuse our way there." Sergeant Nara led the advance unit, which immediately began doing things that made no military sense. They set up defensive positions facing the wrong direction, dug trenches in useless locations, and started planting flowers in the middle of what should have been a battlefield. The Vexari defenders that emerged from the neural structures were clearly struggling to understand what they were facing. These creatures were directly connected to the planet's collective intelligence, but that intelligence was already being overwhelmed by the chaos happening in orbit. Private Hyojin tried her favorite tactic of aggressive friendship on a massive Vexari that looked like a cross between a spider and a tank. "Hi there, big guy," she said cheerfully while dodging its attacks. "You look stressed. Do you want to talk about your feelings?" The creature stopped attacking and stared at her through its connection to the collective consciousness. Exo. Every Vexari on the planet was now trying to analyze the tactical significance of emotional therapy during combat. Corporal Jae Sung was running his own psychological operation, spreading rumors among the planet's defenders that humans could survive by eating their own confusion. Soon, Vexari across the world were trying to understand how confusion could be nutritious. But the real breakthrough came when Dr. Yunsu activated the first cognitive bomb near a major neural cluster. The device began broadcasting random numbers, contradictory statements, and impossible mathematical equations directly into the planet's thinking system. The effect was immediate and devastating. The neural networks began sparking and overloading as they tried to process information that couldn't be processed. The collective consciousness that had coordinated Vexari actions across the galaxy started experiencing something like a massive seizure. Dr. Myung watched in amazement as the planet's surface began to change. The neural structures were malfunctioning, sending random signals instead of coordinated thoughts. Some areas of the planet started thinking they were different planets entirely, in orbit. The Vexari defense fleet was falling apart. Ships were flying into each other, attacking their own allies, or simply shutting down completely as their connection to the homeworld filled with nonsense. Admiral Changmin coordinated the deployment of more cognitive bombs across the planet's surface. Each device added more chaos to the collective consciousness, creating a feedback loop that grew stronger with every passing minute. Sergeant Borum reached the planet's primary thinking center, a massive structure that looked like a brain, the size of a mountain. She planted the final cognitive bomb directly into its core and activated it with a simple message: this statement is false. The paradox spread through the entire planetary consciousness like a virus. Every thinking structure on the world tried to determine whether the statement was true or false, but since both answers created contradictions, they became trapped in endless loops of impossible logic. The Vexari collective consciousness, which had been the most powerful intelligence in the galaxy, crashed completely. Billions of creatures across thousands of worlds suddenly found themselves disconnected from their central coordination system. Without the collective intelligence to guide them, individual Vexari began behaving like confused animals.
Hi there.
Perfect adaptation abilities stopped working. Shapeshifting became random and uncontrolled. Many of them simply stopped moving entirely. Dr. Sojin documented the end of the galaxy's greatest threat from her. Observation posts on the flagship. The Vexari collective consciousness has completely shut down, she reported. Individual creatures are showing signs of severe cognitive damage. They appear to have forgotten how to function without central coordination. The war ended not with explosions or dramatic battles, but with the complete psychological collapse of an entire species. The surviving Vexari retreated to the furthest edges of the galaxy, their once perfect minds now terrified of encountering anything that might be connected to humans. Admiral Changman stood before the Galactic Council 3 months later, receiving the highest honors any species had ever been awarded. But he knew the truth about humanity's victory. We didn't win because we were stronger or smarter, he told the assembled representatives. We won because we were willing to be stupid when being smart wasn't working. The galaxy had learned to fear humanity, but not for the reasons anyone expected. Other species were afraid of human intelligence, human technology, or human determination. But the real source of fear was simpler and more terrifying. Humans were the only species in the galaxy that could choose to abandon logic when survival was at stake. In a universe that operated on predictable principles, this made them the ultimate wild card, Dr. Myung published. Her final report on human combat psychology 6 months after the war ended. Her conclusions would reshape military science across the galaxy. Humans represent something unprecedented in galactic evolution, she wrote. They're the first species to weaponize irrationality itself. Their greatest strength is not their ability to think, but their willingness to stop thinking when necessary. The Galactic Council established new protocols for dealing with human military forces. The basic rule was simple: never assume human actions have logical explanations. Never try to predict human behavior using conventional analysis. And never, under any circumstances, challenge humans to a battle of wits. Because they might choose to fight without using any. The galaxy was safe from the Vexari, but now it had to deal with a new apex predator. A species that could defeat perfect intelligence through perfect chaos. A species that had turned their greatest weakness into their greatest weapon. In the end, humanity had saved the galaxy by proving that sometimes the best way to solve a problem is to stop trying to solve it logically. They had defeated the ultimate predator by becoming something even more